Welcome back, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you all are out fishing. Weather is warmed back up just a little bit from the daggone freezer bowl we had for the last week and a half. And I am glad to say that the snow has melted, the ice has melted off the lakes. We've had temperatures in the mid-60s here in southern Indiana for a couple days. So we went to a lake that we'd never been to. I guess it was the day after New Year's Day. And the lake had a lot of grass in it, a lot of milfoil, a little bit of coontail. And it made me think of one thing I haven't really touched base on is grass fishing. And I've touched base on it a little bit in different times of the year, but specifically wintertime grass fishing. And I consider wintertime grass fishing, when water temperatures get down into the mid to low 50s, all the way down into the low 40s, those fish sometimes will really nestle up in that grass depending upon what kind of weather patterns we're facing. If we've got high pressure, a lot of times those fish will kind of, tuck in that grass. And then on more low pressure days where the fish seem to be sometimes a little more active, they want to get on that outside edge of the grass. So high skies, bluebird days, they're going to nestle in it. Cloudy days, sometimes they tend to kind of roam around the outside edge. So there's three main lures that I typically target bass in the grass in the wintertime. And I'm going to start with the first and foremost, one of my favorites. And this is just an old bladed jig. Now, this is a little different looking bladed jig than what you would traditionally see out of a chatterbait or a Berkley slobber knocker or something of that nature. But this here is a Lost River Lure swim jig head, in which I've put a bigger blade on. Now, the reason I go this route in fishing the grass is if you've ever thrown a chatterbait in the grass, it balls up a lot of times in the grass. That's not necessarily a bad thing at the right time of year when you can snap that rod and snap that bait out of the grass. But you have to remember, in cold water situations, especially when we get down into the 40s, the bait, the fish, they're just not moving as fast. So to make it look natural, what I want to do is I want to go to a bigger blade that displaces more water, which allows me to fish this bladed jig much slower. By fishing it much slower, you're going to get a much more natural presentation out of your lure. That bigger blade also helps float this bait a lot of times above the grass. I don't want this to really nestle way down in it. I'd like to keep it just above it and just kind of tick in the grass. With a lighter weight head like this and a big blade, it's going to want to rise. So I can fish it really slow, and it's just kind of rising slowly above that grass. That's what I'm looking for. The reason the swim jig head also is the weed guard. What I will do with this weed guard, as you can see, I've got a piece of tubing on here, and this is just regular shrink tubing. I will, depending upon how thick the grass is, what you can do without this tubing, this weed guard is fairly light and it can collapse. And whenever it collapses, you're going to have grass balled up on your hook. So I want a stiffer weed guard. So what I will do if I have a weed guard that's a little lighter like this is take a piece of shrink tubing, and then I can adjust it up or down and then heat that up with a lighter, and that will stiffen this weed guard up. So if I'm in really heavy vegetation, then I might slide this out just a little farther and make this a little stiffer. Or if it's sparse, I might keep it down a little bit farther. The other thing is I rarely throw it with a skirt. A lot of times that bigger bulky bait, the fish's metabolism is low, and you hear a lot of guys say bigger bait, bigger bass, wintertime they want a big meal. Yes, that's true to an extent. This still provides a very big meal, but what I'm doing here is by eliminating the skirt, I'm taking some action out of the bait. And then I go to just a regular swim bait on the back, just a 4.5 inch swim bait on the back of this. The other thing is the trailer creates drag. I don't want drag in that grass because it's more likely for that grass to ball up. So I want something very streamlined. When this comes through that grass, there's very little drag. And it keeps it more streamlined, less grass on the bait, more chance of getting a bite, more natural presentation for the cold water. The next thing I like to do is a good old jerkbait, suspending jerkbait. This is a KVD 2-hook. And what I want to do with my jerkbaits is I want to get the jerkbait depth to where it's just above the grass, where whenever I twitch it and it goes down, I'm maybe only going down and just ticking the grass. Because with these exposed treble hooks, you're going to stay caught in it a lot. Normally, in a little bit warmer temperatures, you could snap it out of that grass and get a reaction strike. You still can this time of year, but it's going to look much more natural if you could keep this bait just above the grass or just on the outside edge. The other thing that I do is I will put a feathered treble hook on the back. Now, in cold water, you're going to twitch, pause, and sometimes long pauses to elicit those strikes. When the water's warmer, obviously you can fish it a lot faster. So what I'll do is I will put a feathered treble on there. And the reason I'm doing that is when that bait is just sitting there, not moving, this feathered treble will actually reflect a little bit of light, and these feathers will actually move just a little bit in the water, giving the bait action when it's sitting completely still, but not overpowering. What I do, though, is when I put a feathered treble on, most feathered trebles you buy have way too much feather on it, in my opinion. I really like to thin these out and kind of fan them out a little bit. So I'll just take a pocket knife, put my thumb on it, and just pull back just like that and get rid of some of that excess, just like that. And then straighten it back out. And I've really thinned that down a little bit. You can trim them down with scissors. I don't want to do that because I don't want to lose the length of that feather. Just want to thin it out just a little bit. And you can do that by just taking a pocket knife and run your fingers across it, and it'll pull some of those feathers out without completely demolishing it. But that is one of the keys. Now, if you don't have a jerkbait that can get quite deep enough, then I'll use suspend dots, just a little stick-on lead suspend dots, and that will help get this bait down a little bit deeper. That is something you just have to play with on the water to kind of figure out what depth this needs to go. I've got some other jerkbaits that go a little bit deeper in the 8 to 10 foot range. The other thing you can do is you can change your line size. If you want a deeper crankbait to not go as deep, you can throw it on a little thicker fluorocarbon, or you could even go to mono and get that bait to float up just a little bit higher. All things you can do on the water to try to get that bait to just sit above the grass or just tick the top of it. And then my absolute favorite and final way when the water gets really cold. So chatterbait, mid 50s all the way down to upper 40s. Once we hit upper 40s, I'm going to primarily go to a jerkbait. Once we get down into the low 40s, that's when you're going to see me pick up a swim jig. Now, most of you are saying, swim jig, oh my gosh, that's, you're moving that along pretty fast. I'm not. What I'm doing with a swim jig, and I will put a trailer on the back depending upon, there again, how thick the grass is. What I want to do is, if it's real thick, I want to go with a swim bait trailer. Not a whole lot of action, very natural, comes through the grass real clean. If the grass is super thick and I'm trying to keep the swim jig on top, I will go to a crawl trailer that's rigged horizontally so that it actually floats this jig on top of the grass and doesn't allow the jig to roll side to side. That bait will actually float it up and keep it on top of the grass without it rolling. I do the same thing with a piece of shrink tubing. The thicker the grass, the farther out I'm going to slide that to stiffen that weed guard up. And that's something you can do real easy. Grab you some shrink tubing at the hardware store, cut you a little sliver off and put it on there, and that will make a big difference on how much grass or grass bass you pull back to the boat. Big key right there is making sure you have that stiffer weed guard when you're fishing grass. So what you're going to do is you're going to bomb a cast out there into that grass and literally just feather that swim jig through the grass real slow. I'm going to throw all these baits I'm going to typically throw on fluorocarbon. I'm going to start 14 pound, depending upon how thick the grass is. I may go all the way up to 20, but 14 is going to be kind of my starting point on all of these baits. If I need this jerkbait to go deeper, I may go down to even 8 pound test to get that extra foot or two out of that jerkbait to get the depth that I want. Keep in mind, there's lots of other baits that will work. There's lots of variables in this, but these are the top 3 that work for me, and they're kind of my go-to in that vegetation in the wintertime. The key to it is, when you think you're fishing slow or too slow, you probably need to slow down even more. And that is really, really hard for me to do because I'm a cranker and winder as fast as I can back to the boat. So it is very difficult for me. But I can promise you the swim jig, that's a sneaky little deal that not a lot of people fish a swim jig in cold, cold water. Lost River Lures swim jig, you can get a hold of these. Lost River Lures on Facebook. Hit Mark up, great dude. He will line you out on some swim jigs and any other things that you need. Spinner baits, buzz baits, get prepped for the year. Shaky heads, wobble heads, he's got it all. Make sure you use the promo code SIO10. Get yourself 10% off and prepared for the year. You all have a good one. Thanks again for tuning in. Like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And hopefully we'll be flipping some bass in the boat here before too long.